So some real quick disclosures before we get into this. Dita did send this out for a review. I'm not being paid, asked, or otherwise influenced to say anything good or bad about this headphone. All thoughts and opinions, like with every review, are my own. Hey, what's up guys? My name is Josh and welcome to another review. Today we're going to be taking a look at a high-end in-ear headphone, which are these. And these are the Dita Dream XLS, which come in at $2,200, which is a very high price tag to be asking for an IEM. So quite frankly, I have some pretty high expectations for this thing. So let's go ahead and take a look at the Dream XLS and how it competes in the rest of the market. So the first thing that people are going to notice and either be totally in love with or totally against is going to be the looks. In my opinion, they're going to be pretty polarizing. Because they go with a more flashy design, they have these gold accents on this titanium chassis. It's definitely screaming, hey, I'm a premium product, and the price tag is screaming, hey, I have a premium sound. So before we get into the fit and finish, I want to talk about a couple of the accessories that come with this. Now this cable in some ways is great, in other ways, it's just okay. So it's kind of heavy. It doesn't have the lightest weight feel to it, although it's not, exceedingly heavy, but the splitter here, for example, is made of titanium also. What it is really good with is there's no noise on it. Like when you touch it, I can't hear that really at all. So when it's rubbing around on your shirt or something like that, you're not gonna make out any noise whatsoever. It shouldn't be interrupting your music at all. Now at the end of the cable on the opposite of the ear tips, they have this connector that they call the awesome cable. So it comes with this 4-pin splitter at the end that you can unscrew and rescrew different types of connections onto. And speaking of those connections, it does come with a 2.5 balance connection with this right angle connector here. And then it comes with a 4.4 millimeter TRRRS. Now, this system is kind of awesome. I'm not gonna lie, they properly named it. I actually really do dig this system because you can go from different sources and different cable types relatively easily. And then you don't have to worry about keeping a hold of a lot of cables. You just have to worry about making sure that you're not losing these adapters at the end of it. Now to continue with the accessories experience, you do have a cleaning cloth, which is not really that big of a deal, but they do provide some disposable extra kind of wax filters. It does only come with 4 filters total, so you could exchange it twice, and then I'm sure if you contacted Dita, they'd either sell a pair or send a pair to you. And then you have the ear tips, which let's talk about the ear tips for a second. So my biggest complaint for this headphone is the fit. The actual stem that goes into your ear canal, for me, relative to the size of the body, is really small, and it doesn't quite go into my ear as easily. So I have to compensate by actually finding aftermarket tips that are a little bit longer and allow it to extend better inside my ear and get a better fit. Because as of right now, it sits more on the outside and I can't seem to get a good seal with the stock tips. Now, as IEM users and any of your headphone users know, mileage for fit is gonna vary heavily from person to person. So while this is an issue for me, it's probably not going to be an issue for a lot of other people, but I'm a little bit disappointed that they couldn't have made the stem a little bit longer just to accommodate a few more ears. Although the stem itself is relatively minimal in size, and I don't think it's going to be irritating based off of its width or anything like that, like a couple other IEMs that we have coming up, which have very big stems that are going to be a problem for a completely different set of people. Now, while I find this a little bit disappointing, I wasn't considering it necessarily a deal breaker, but just know that that may be something you encounter if you do purchase this. Now, continuing on the accessory package, it just comes with a hard case, which comes with a little string that's actually inside here that I'm not sure if this is supposed to be like worn around the neck or something like that, but either way, hard case, pretty nice. Feels like a stiffer leather, and then a very soft, small little pouch. All right, so specs. 22 ohms, 104 dB sensitivity level. So it's kind of medium efficiency for an in-ear, definitely able to be driven off of a phone. And I guess that will lead us into the amplification portion of this, what I was using the amplifier. So lately I've been using 2 main amplifiers, which is gonna be the THX 789 and the THX monoprice DAC amp. Both are pretty good. Now I've also been using some tube options like the iFi IDSD Pro, which is a tube hybrid amp, and it's a pretty nice one as well. A noteworthy part of all of those is that you are actually able to pick up the noise floor on all of them with this earbud. So that is something that you're gonna definitely want, something that is built for an IEM. For example, an iFi IDSD Black Label with this is gonna be absolutely monstrous. So the sound. Yes. Okay, one of those headphones that is incredible for certain types of things and then just okay for others. Now I do have the final A8000 here, which I love, and I have a brief comparison, kind of little statements here and there throughout, and then at the end I'm going to do a little bit more of a thorough comparison versus the Dita. And I guess those comparisons start now. The A8000 is very good with just about every type of music. It's very forgiving. It's going to sound pretty much great all of the time. The Dita is going to sound truly exceptional for certain types of music, certain songs, and we'll get into that. But it's going to be even what I would categorize as a little bit punishing for things that are not recorded well. So right away, I want to establish that this is a headphone for users who listen to like super high quality, you know, really hardcore audiophile music stuff, or soundtracks, really big sounding orchestral type of music. That's going to be this thing's bread and butter, and let's get into why. So this starts off with the treble response. So this is one of the more fascinating and honestly confusing aspects of the sound signature for me, because it's somehow in certain areas very forward yet not harsh in any way. It has this level of being highly analytical but not overly analytical. It doesn't have a clinical sound or anything. It sounds very lively. Timbre characteristics are on point, and it's very multifaceted there and very present, but it doesn't seem to sort of overstretch and overstate what it's capable of doing. It plays very well within the boundaries that it kind of exists for itself. So above 10K, and actually more above like 13, 15K, there's not a whole lot there. So those upper end frequencies, you're not going to be picking them up too much. And that's going to be part of the reason why I think that you're not going to be getting this hyper analytical feel to the sound. You know, it's not going to be too present in the treble, even though the treble is a very present part of the music. And treble response compared to the A8000, I actually find to be more detailed on the Dita, whilst being less forward in certain areas. And it's a confusing mix because usually I would assume that, you know, a less forward headphone would be less detailed, especially compared to the really good resolution of the A8000. This is a very well resolving headphone, but the Dita, I think, outperforms it most of the time. Okay, so this brings us to mid-range and where we start getting more specific about the type of music that I would recommend using with this, because it's kind of disappointing. I think for $2,200, it's just, I don't know, it just doesn't quite do it for me for the actual mid-range performance here. So with this, you're going to get very solid things like acoustic instruments. They're going to be very pleasant to listen to, especially with the bass response, which we'll talk in a second about, and the treble response. But then you started getting into vocalists, which compared to instruments have a relatively limited range. I don't know, it sounds more one-dimensional than the rest of the music, and it's arguably, I think, the weakest point of this headphone. And there's a couple reasons why. The lower mid-range is not super forward. I think it could do with a little bit more of a boost and a little bit more warmth and liveliness, but as of right now, it's kind of dry. And then the upper mid-range is a little bit too boosted, in my opinion. So you've got this kind of dip in the lower mid-range and this boost in the upper mid-range, and it can make certain vocalists seem quite unpleasant and quite shouty. Just for a reference that everybody's familiar with the sound of his voice, The Weeknd, he can sound kind of squealish in a way. Like it doesn't sound pleasant, does it? And it's not always pleasant, but with certain vocalists that cover a specific range that will compensate this well enough, like Avi Kaplan, for example, this is going to perform really, really well with those deeper male vocalists because they can kind of fill in the gap and don't have a lot of kind of pressure and heat where this is already applying pressure and heat, being that upper mid-range. Now, admittedly, I am kind of making a bigger deal out of this than is necessarily warranted, because when you're listening to it, it doesn't really bug you that much. But again, when you're starting to look at it with a more clinical eye, for $2,000, I think the performance could have been handled a little bit better. I do think, though, it's also fair to say that you wouldn't necessarily be getting what this is good at if you had that. And let me explain with the bass response. So the bass response on the A8000 was very impressive for its positional attributes, not necessarily for the amount. The Dita has both. Now, for you bass heads, this is probably still not going to be a headphone that is going to be your end all be all, because it's still not super strong bass, but the quality of it and the staging of it and the position of it is just awesome. And my recommendation for this is to stick with music that has a really rich low end. Okay, so all that's fine and dandy. There's some complete areas, there's some incomplete areas. This headphone is not perfect. Neither is any other headphone. The mid-range is a little bit disappointing so far. I do wish it could be better, and that's going to be my biggest gripe about this headphone, outside of the fit at least. So then we have to talk about the thing that I'm going to tell people about this headphone if they ask me about it. If they're going to be like, hey, what is the Dream XLS good at? XLS stands for extra large soundstage. And while I do not necessarily think it's entirely accurate, I would alter the statement a little bit. So if you're gonna look at width and being like far out, no, it's not a far out of your head type of experience. But what this does have, and probably does better than any IEM I have heard so far, double checking my archive here, I'm pretty sure it's better, is the layering. I think what is really cool is the placement variety. So there's a little bit of soundstage, but it's not really like a throw way out of your head, like you're gonna hear a knock on the outside and think it's coming from your door, like some really good headphones can do. But it does soundstage quite wide. So let's just say you're working with kind of the boundary of your shoulders, like the outer distance of the soundstage. The variety of placement positions within that boundary is really strange. And it's not only left to right, but it's also forward to back. So you've got kind of this globe, and it's not just left to right, it's not just forward to back, it's also up and down. And you've got this kind of ball around your head of potential placements for instruments just based off of how the music was recorded. And this is going to be what separates, and the main reason why I recommend listening to really good recorded music over less good recorded music. Because with most headphones and most in-ears that I've tried, you work with kind of a set of expected positions with this headphone. So the HD800, for example, which is a full-size headphone, not an IEM, but I have more experience with headphones, and I think my audience does too. So that headphone is, it's kind of all this way, right? And it's really wide out, but it's kind of all from, the inside of your head all the way to the outside. Then you have something like the Aria, which is less wide, but it's got more forward depth. And then you have something like a Odyssey LCD2C, which is going to have kind of blobs of sound where it can kind of come from here, and then it can kind of come from here, but it's kind of going to be one of those few positions. So you kind of get used to where the headphone is going to play certain sounds, and that soundstage can be kind of expected at a certain point. Like, I know exactly how any given song is going to sound on an HD800S. I just do, because it's got an expectation set. The Dita, I have no clue. I really don't, because in that globe, you'll hear things that are up here, and then down here, and then back here, and then in front of you, far left. Well, that's your left, my right. Far left and far right, and everywhere in between. So when I put this on, and I hear something like, I just wrote an example here, Childish Gambino's California. Pretty well-known song. I've heard it a bunch of times. I really like that song personally. And listening to the A8000 and then switching to full-size headphones just to verify I'm not crazy, and then going to the Dita, the wood instruments, for example, in the background, the bass note, the kind of clicking, and those crispy little ticks, those sounds are happening in an area of the kind of music in my head that does not make sense and is not relevant to most other headphones, because you've got the front track, which is kind of the bass line, you know, the vocal performance is kind of all happening kind of right here. And then you got this really specific placement of this kind of bass slap kind of right here in the back ball of your head. And then you have these ticks that are happening kind of not just behind you, but also in front of you, and they're very crisp and finite, and they don't blend into the music at all. They stand completely out of the music. So I think it's more than fair to say that I'm highly impressed with the placement. And if somebody were to ask me, what's the best feature about this, definitely going to be the imaging capability and the layering capability in the boundaries that it can play in is very good, if you didn't get that already. Okay, so some brief comparisons against the A8000, which is my reference kind of $2,000 in-ear headphone. So the upper mid-range is a little bit more forward on the Dita, and it makes it a little bit unpleasant some of the time. It's one of the more punishing aspects of it. So I don't recommend listening to things that are very heavily focused forward to it. This fills out the mid-range in a way that I find to be more pleasing for more music. And that's just going to be for music that is vocal based. The Dita also comparatively seems to be quite a bit more V-shaped, but not really a V-shaped sound somehow. I think it's just that dip in the lower mid-range that the A8000 can fill out a lot better than the Dita can. That makes the Dita seem a little bit boosted in the bass and the treble, even though when you're listening to just the Dita, it doesn't come across as a V-shaped headphone, if that makes any sense at all. Hopefully it does. Okay, and then the biggest difference between these two is the type of music that they complement. So the A8000 is a relatively forgiving headphone, and it's gonna sound pretty good off of just about everything. Every type of music you listen to this on, it obviously plays some better than others, but for the most part, I can listen to anything on here and it's gonna sound great. The Dita, like I said though, you gotta be kind of specific about what type of music you're listening to it on. You can obviously listen to anything, but there are certain things that are going to scale really well with the capability of the headphone. Then other things like old school rock, not gonna be for this headphone. It's gonna be pretty harsh, and it's just not gonna be complemented very well by this. So that begs the question of what is complemented by this. There's a song that I kind of listen to every once in a while, and it's not a particularly impressive song usually. It's just something that I kind of like. So it's TikTok from the Hans Zimmer soundtrack for Sherlock Holmes, I think the second movie. So I don't want to go totally overboard on the explanation of this, but on the Dita, it sounds ballsier than most other headphones, grander than most other headphones, and will make, I think, anybody listening to that at a decent level absolutely shudder with how impressive this headphone displays a song like that. And this actually applies specifically to Hans Zimmer quite a bit for this headphone. That type of music is like, it's tailor-made for this type of headphone. So the conclusion of all this, honestly, it's pretty rare for me to have an experience that I consider one, really unique, or two, better than everything I've heard on specific types of music or a specific song that I'm used to hearing and I test everything on. It's at this point rare for me to experience that. So personally, I'm very, very impressed with that type of stuff. Really impressed. I do think though that this headphone, like if you're one of those buyers who is buying multiple headphones because you want to have a specific headphone for a specific type of music and you want to switch to another headphone, like I do that personally. I don't have an end-all be-all headphone for everything. I have friends who do that. I know people who do that. Shout out to Nima, for example. If that's you and you got a crazy budget, I can definitely recommend this. But if you're one of those people who is like, saving your pennies to buy one super high-end IEM and you're only gonna buy one and you're gonna listen to everything on it, I think that there might be some better options, just depending on the type of music you like. If all that you listen to is the type of music that this is gonna play with, basically anything you go on YouTube and search audiophile music for and you find that type of stuff, the really, really well recorded things like Cecile McLaurin-Salvant, Diana Krall, things of that nature are exceptional. They truly are. And I give it highest regards for that. An overall recommendation though, I would say yes, but be cautious about your circumstances. Okay, So I think that's gonna wrap it up. Dita did send this out for a review. Thank you very much, Dita, for being part of the channel and helping out. I'd love to check out a lot of your lower end stuff as well, because this is very impressive. All right, guys, thank you very much for watching. Until the next video, my name is Josh, signing off.